Hi everyone, thanks for attending today's co-production session, which will be led by Evan Odell, a researcher at Disability Rights UK, who will be telling us all about the principles of co-production. Just to tell you a bit more about us, Disability Rights UK is a user-led pan-disability charity. So we exist to build leadership and power amongst disabled people to create a movement for change. Our charitable objectives include breaking the link between disability and poverty and enabling disabled people to achieve independence and control over their own lives. The majority of our staff and trustees have lived experience of disability. So Get Yourself Active is a programme that's funded by Sport England and led by Disability Rights UK. We work alongside disabled people to lead change in the social care, health and sports sectors in order to improve health and wellbeing outcomes for disabled people. And co-production is a really important part of the work we do at Get Yourself Active. We are working closely with other disabled people's user-led organisations and the sports sector to embed co-production in practice, ensuring that the sports sector works effectively with disabled people to co-produce solutions to inactivity. The webinar that we're hosting today is just one of the many topics that we will be covering over the next couple of months. We'll be hosting a number of short webinars once a week that cover a range of important topics, all to do with co-production. The aim of these sessions is to support more organisations in both the sports sector and disability sector to understand the basics of co-production, as well as sharing good practice on effectively embedding co-production in practice. So we'll also be recording these sessions and uploading them to our website. So feel free to visit our website to view the timetable for the webinars and to watch recorded sessions after they are live. And just to let you know, as this is only a short session, we will not be doing any Q&A today. However, feel free to email me if you do have any questions and we can get back to you after the session. I'll also add my email address to the chat so that you have this. So I'm going to stop talking now and pass over to Evan, who's going to begin the session. And I really hope you enjoy learning all about the principles of co-production. So over to you, Evan.
Thanks, Liddy. So thank you for joining me this morning. So let's see if I can get these slides to work. Aha, here we go. So in terms of the principles of co-production, I'm sure particularly those of you who have been able to attend previous sessions will be familiar with this, but it can be useful to just as a quick refresher as to what is co-production. So we have the definition from the organization Think Local, Act Personal. And I think it's a quite useful definition in that it emphasizes that it's a concept and it's a set of ideas rather than a fixed thing. So co-production will look very different and feel very different and be very different depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve, what kind of work you're trying to do through co-production. But the general concept is bringing together people from different backgrounds, different levels of involvement in something, and improving it. So in the case of public services, in the case of sports, in my experience, it's a lot to do with research projects, but you would have people who are on kind of all different sides of something to work together to improve it. And it is about being consulted, but meaningfully consulted, and not just being asked what you think is not just asking users of a service how should that service be improved, but to actively involve those service users in that improvement, in sometimes very detailed minutia of how a service is delivered and how it can be changed. And another kind of important aspect of this concept is the idea of accountability, that everyone involved in co-production, be they professionals, be they service providers, be they service users, they are accountable to each other. And if particularly if you are a service provider and you're working with service users and there's something that they want that you're not able to deliver on for whatever reason, in a lot of traditional consultations, people may request something, it doesn't happen, and that just gets ignored, whereas it's incumbent on you as service providers to explain why and to make people understand why something is or is not possible. And as these features, it is defining people who use services as assets with skills. The best expert on anyone's life is them. People know what their own interests are quite strongly. They know what their own experiences are. They know what they're able and unable to do often. And it's also about building on the existing expertise that people have. It's about building on the that shared history and that shared knowledge. And it combines sort of professionals, it provides volunteers, provides service, combines service users. And the idea is to have any kind of co-production session. So any time where you bring together all these various different groups to work on something. The most successful ones, there's a really strong degree of like mutual respect and understanding of people's own experiences and expertise, that sort of everyone is able to acknowledge everyone else as being an expert on something. And it's also around sort of centering the service around what is the most important thing to the service users, and to make sure that it's actually doing what it is supposed to be doing, and to be helping them to become, as the Social Care Institute for Excellence puts it quite well, is helping organizations become agents for change rather than just being service providers. And so we have kind of four key principles of co-production. First one being equality, which is relatively straightforward: diversity, accessibility, and reciprocity. And so equality is around the sort of recognizing everyone is like equally, in the context of co-production, equally valid, equally able to do something, and equally able to contribute to a piece of work. Diversity is around, of course, also having a range of voices and having a range of perspectives on a particular issue, on a particular service. And it is really incumbent, particularly on service providers, to make a point of reaching out and engaging with and bringing in people to the process of co-production. So it is about identifying people that you know have views on stuff, even if they're views that you might find uncomfortable because they're very critical of you. Those are kind of the most important things to have. It's also to make sure you represent as much as you can the full range of people who would be using your service, or who might be using your service. And it can also be helpful to bring in people who are not, but who could benefit from it. So in the case of the sports sector, bringing people into co-production who are not at all physically active can be a really insightful way of both finding out what are the barriers that they face and what you can do and what they can do to remove some of those barriers. And it's also about accessibility is another very important aspect of co-production, that people are able to take part, and that can be quite simple, from making sure that documents are provided in a format that everyone's able to use and can read, to timing is also quite important. So co-production meetings that are being held at pre-pandemic or post-pandemic times at 11 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday are going to have a very different attendee base than something that's held in the evenings or on weekends, because a lot of your service users might not be able to go to a midday, midweek meeting in person or even virtually, because they would have other commitments. They might be at work or at school, or they might be looking after children. And it's about, it's not just the kind of standard things around accessibility that from Disability Rights UK we like to talk about, but it's also about making sure that the people you most need to hear from are able to participate. And the barriers to that are not necessarily, are not always ones around disability. They can simply be about time and place as well. And then the fourth principle is of reciprocity, that you recognize that everyone taking part recognizes the validity and the expertise that everyone else involved has, and is able to bring something to the process of co-production, be it big or small, that is sort of important and integral. And so, yeah, this is kind of a useful kind of diagram that covers some of these other other perspectives. So one of the things as well around co-production is that a lot of it is quite personally driven. So I mostly come from this from a research perspective, and one of the biggest issues that we found with getting co-produced research projects to work is that the people who fund research projects are really reluctant to pay for the costs of proper co-production, even though it's not very much. It's often just, a few bags of crisps and a few cups of tea, but that sort of process of actually being able to have a relatively friendly and personalized conversation is a really quite important aspect of it. The other kind of important thing is around this idea of joint responsibility and joint understanding and sort of shared decision making. And so co-production, particularly at its most sort of involved levels, means that the service users are taking responsibilities for aspects of the service itself, and that is both good and bad responsibility, or responsibility for positive and for negative outcomes. And that can be quite difficult, particularly for service providers who have been delivering something in a certain way for a very, very long time. It can be very uncomfortable to be told that your service users actually don't like how it's been delivered. They're not particularly happy with it. It's not actually doing what they think it should be doing. But that process is also really, really important and really vital to actually getting the service to work. Because if the service is not working well, then there's not much, what's really the point of it. And so in terms of the kind of 4 principles I mentioned, the idea of equality is probably the most important. Everyone has useful assets. Everyone has, knowledge and expertise that's important. And there's not, one person or group that is the most important. There's not one single priority that overrides all of the others. But you're attempting to balance all of your different, sometimes competing priorities around delivering a particular service or delivering a piece of work. And that means practitioners and of service users need to be both equally recognized. One of the things that can often go wrong in co-production is the balance will shift far too much one way or the other. So oftentimes co-production has been used as a means of kind of entirely, cutting practitioners out of decision making entirely, even though as practitioners or service delivery providers, there's a lot of expertise there, there's a lot of knowledge there. And so it's not about sort of replacing one with the other. It is about trying to put them onto a more equal footing and to make it as effective as possible. As I said, diversity, it is very important to kind of proactively tackle underrepresentation and exclusion. And that can mean going out and, deliberately targeting people and really kind of pushing them and inviting them to get involved. Because, some people find it more difficult than others. You may have to provide extra support or extra incentives to make sure that people can take part. And that there's the common issues around impairment, but that everyone who is able to use your service should be, at least in theory, able to take part in co-production. Even if they have no interest themselves in, there shouldn't be any kind of built-in barrier to that. And of course, around accessibility is also integral to it. And to make all of it as accessible as possible. One of the big issues in a lot of service delivery, particularly in social services, is there's a lot of jargon. There's a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of weird ways of speaking that just any kind of professional group will develop over time. And that's a massive barrier. And I think challenging that can be really beneficial, both to the process of co-production, but also to the process of people becoming members of your staff team. If getting a job with a particular service provider means you have to take 6 months to learn an entire new language, that is really a problem. So making it more accessible for co-production will also make it more accessible for a range of other things that you would be doing. And reciprocity is also kind of like the fourth and final principle. And taking part in co-production, there's quite a lot of research on this. People who take part in co-produce projects that don't go anywhere, where there's no positive change, that is quite disheartening. People will become really depressed. They will report negative impacts on well-being. They'll stop engaging with the service or with the service provider, and that they will, it has a really sort of negative impact on the participants in co-production. So that means you can't, it has to lead to something, even if there's no actual change, but there's just that feeling of like being engaged and being listened to. People don't feel that they have been listened to or that they've been taken seriously as human beings. That is really quite harmful. And there's various ways of making sure that there is this reciprocity that can be given. You can pay people to attend co-production and to engage in co-production. It is worth keeping in mind, if you're doing that in some circumstances, people will often be concerned, particularly if they're receiving certain benefits, that receiving money or receiving gift certificates could impact their benefit eligibility. So it's important to check exactly what the rules are around that. They are able to receive money to engage in co-production, but there's certain steps that have to be taken to make that possible. And also sort of informal means of supporting people or sort of recognizing people's contributions can be quite important as well. Anything from just like having a closer relationship with service providers to simple like acknowledgement in like newsletters or giving people certificates. When we've done work with co-production and young people, a lot of them really, really liked getting like reference letters, because particularly for people who are starting out, 16 to sort of mid-20s, references can be really quite important for them in terms of like finding jobs or finding education. So that is another means of recognizing people's contributions. But the single most important way to recognize those contributions is to make sure that there is some kind of change happens, something results from their engagement in co-production. So I guess I'll wrap things up there. That's been about 15 minutes. So thank you for joining in. As Liddy said at the beginning, if you've got questions, comments, anything, please do email and we'll do our best to respond. And when you exit the session, there will be an evaluation. Please complete it. And there are more webinars on getyourselfactive.org that I would highly recommend checking out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evan. That was a really great session. So just to let you know that we have got our next 3 dates up as well on the website. So the next webinar, which is next week, is going to be hosted by Leanne Whiteman, who's our Head of Programs and Impact at Disability Rights UK, and she also works on our Get Yourself Active programme. So she'll be leading a session on the benefits of co-production, and you can log on, go onto the website and click on the registration links. I've also put the link to the website in the chat as well. And the recorded session will also be on the website shortly as well, for the session that Evan's just done. So we've also posted a guide on our website for co-producing physical activity during the coronavirus outbreak. So I posted the link onto the chat for that as well. For those of you that are still here, we're also looking for organisations that have some examples of good practice in co-production approaches or any case studies. And this is so that we can use these to demonstrate co-production in practice. So if you do have any examples that you'd like to share or know any organisations that might have examples, please let me know by email. This will be really, really useful. And when you exit, as Evan said, there'll be a survey. So if you could take 2 minutes just to complete this will be really good and useful for sort of developing and rolling out our co-production training in the future. So thanks a lot, everyone, for taking part, and we hope you enjoyed the session, and hopefully see you next week for benefits of co-production. Thank you.